My name is Zuza, and I am a mother. I am from the news industry, and I'm a feminist. And today, I want to talk you into a revolution. But first, let me tell you what I see. When I look at the world from the perspective of my newsroom, I see a giant mess. I see tensions rising between nations and within nations. I see a great discrepancy between the people who have and the people who have not. And I see cracks in the fortress of democracy, both in Europe and in the United States. But when I put on my feminist glasses and I look at this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous picture, you know what I see? I see an amazing opportunity, and I want to show that to you. But in order for you to see it, you have to put on my glasses. You have to take on the feminist perspective. And this isn't easy, because it's a perspective that's full of stigma. So I'm going to walk you through it. It used to be that the word for feminist was witches. Witches were women said to be endowed with the power to terminate unwanted pregnancies, and they were depicted as violently ugly. It was also rumored that witches had vaginas lined with jagged and terrible teeth. The only place for a witch is the stake. Another term for women in the 60s that were feminists was, these were women who wanted to control their own lives, and they slipped from the conventions, especially sexual conventions. And so women who reached for birth control, for LSD, and for academic degrees were called hippies, and they were perceived as hairy and prone to drug use and activism. The only place appropriate for a hippie was a VW bug or jail. Now, the entertainment industry has gobbled up the intellectual activist feminist and spit her back out as a bitch. Bitches are unapologetic rebel warriors who have the strength, the power, and very often the brutality that used to be reserved only for soldiers, dictators, and superheroes. What else can we say about the modern empowered bitch? Well, she certainly does not look like a soccer mom. So the only place appropriate for a bitch to be is on a singles app. Because who would want to have a family with a bitch? Now, what I want to tell you, if this was 5 or 10 years ago, my feminist glasses, looking at this situation, would show me great progress. Because in fact, feminists have gone from being burned to death and tortured at the stake to being segregated from the normal world of families and couples, which is enormous progress to have made. And there's been other progress, of course. Women can now vote in every country in the world except for Saudi Arabia and Vatican City. And Lebanon. Thank you. Women in many countries can also own property, handle finances, and enter into business segments that used to be reserved only for men. So, when you think about all that progress, you start to wonder, why is the women's movement still necessary? And if it was 5 or 10 years ago, I would have told you that the current conditions are such that eventually this long and steady road would take us to complete equality. But today, in 2018, the picture has changed. If you train your glasses, your feminist lens, on the democratic West, what you will see is the sudden and urgent mobilization of the women's movement. Think about what's happened in the last year alone, or the last 2 years. This past March, on International Women's Day in Spain, 5 million people took to the streets. In the last 2 years, in Poland, the women's marches have gathered hundreds of thousands of people. In Washington, D.C., 2 years ago, maybe 3, 250,000 women marched on Washington after the inauguration of Donald Trump. And in Turkey, the women's movement is the main oppositional force to Erdogan. And it kind of makes you wonder, when you look at this reality, since women have come so far, why is it that they're so angry now? Perhaps it's because of what we still have not achieved. Take a closer look at this progress. The World Economic Forum publishes an annual report called the Gender Gap Report, and they use it to measure the percentage of equality in the world. And their latest report shows that women have gained, out of 100% equality, women have currently 68%. Okay? That means that the gender scales are still about 32% off balance, which is roughly like going to your favorite Italian place, ordering a pizza, and getting it with 3 slices missing. What was on those slices? What are women not getting? Well, the gender report shows that the 2 areas where women are least equal are politics and economy. Economic inequality is at 58%, which means women have 58%, men have 100%. And political inequality is 23%. You know what that means? That means that the toppings on those missing slices are wealth and the power to participate in the ruling elites of the world. So those are basically the best slices. What that means is that in all the progress that women have made, in 2018, women have 32% less power than men. So is that what's mobilizing the women's movement? Yes, but that is not the only thing. There is another very important factor that I want to point out to you, and that is the digital revolution. Because where women have failed to gain power, tech companies have succeeded. The giant tech companies of the world today have amassed the power and the influence that used to be attainable only for empires. These companies famously boast that they are disrupting the world. And we usually say this about Facebook and social interactions, about Google and the world's streams of information, or Amazon and shopping, or Uber and transportation. But what's new in 2018 is that now we can all see that the digital revolution has also disrupted politics. Whether it is by scraping our private information or by using our attention, giant internet technology now makes it possible to influence and manipulate public opinion on a gigantic scale. And the effects of that are very political and will probably get more so. The biggest example, the most visible example of this is the impact of technology and platforms on the US presidential elections that were lost by Hillary Clinton. In Europe, The data scraped from Facebook by internet research company Cambridge Analytica is being linked to the success of the Brexit Leave campaign. And internationally, Twitter has disrupted the buffering power of diplomacy by putting world leaders in direct contact with each other. I don't know how many of you saw the tweet storm between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un when they started boasting about who has the bigger nuclear button. That exchange brought us miles closer to nuclear war than we've ever been before. So this disruption is major. What does this have to do with women? Well, I'll tell you, but I want to talk about Europe first. Because what if I told you that Europe has been politically disrupted by technology before? The observation isn't mine. My father, who leads the Global Intelligence Service, remarked to me recently that the last time we had a technology revolution, it was the onset of the industrial era, okay? Back when steam engines and factories were invented and started to be used in Europe, they changed reality in this part of the world so much that it needed a new political system to organize it. Think about it. Before the industrial era, Europe was mainly a bunch of agricultural kingdoms. But when technology increased the speed of trains and transport, when factories started producing exponentially more than craftspeople ever could, Europe's military and economic power exploded. So the great monarchs, the kings and the queens, they decided to use that power and go out and conquer the world. That's when they grew their colonial empires. Meanwhile, Germany, which was also industrially empowered, was developing a hunger for an empire of its own. And when those powers clashed, we got 2 world wars. And after those world wars were finished, Europe was changed forever. Because after the world wars, there were no more monarchies. The kingdoms, they fell apart, they fractured into republics. And that's when democracy became the dominant political system of the Western industrialized world. And I put it to you that this is happening again. Only this time, instead of steam engines and factories, we have digital technology that is feeding these powerful technology companies as they grow their global empires. And as they do that, they create new economies. And they have grown out of the reach and control of existing political systems. So what I'm saying is that in the same way that steam engines and factories brought about the end of monarchies in Europe, the digital revolution could be posing a threat to democracy. And that's where we come back to women and the opportunity I mentioned at the very beginning. Because I think this is why the women's movement is so mobilized. Women see the threat to the democracy, and they are out in the streets because they want to protect it. No other political system has ever given women as much progress as democracy. So as a group, women have a vested interest in protecting it, and that's why they're out in the streets. One of the few women who ever reached the top tiers of power in the industrialized West, or the democratic West, was Madeleine Albright. And she said, "Development without democracy, improbable. Democracy without women, impossible." And women feel exactly the same way about democracy. But you know what? You can't fight history. Trying to stop change from happening is a losing strategy. Instead, You can engage with history, however. When change is happening, things that used to be set in stone, the old rules, the barriers, the things that were impossible for decades, they suddenly start to move, which means there is a tremendous opportunity here, an opportunity for us, especially us in Europe, to design the political revolution that is coming anyway. Since it's coming, let's not wait for 2 world wars to bring it to our doorstep. Let's design it. And what's more, we have experience in this as well. The last time conflict and disruption were upon Europe, Europeans designed for peace, prosperity, and diversity, and they got the European Union. And it has been good. But now, with the digital revolution changing the game, it's time to upgrade the EU. It's time to iterate and have an EU 2.0. And the fantastic thing about this opportunity is that we have remarkable tools lying around just waiting for us to use them to this purpose. For example, the management concepts and practice used in technology startups, the ones that are changing the world, are very different from the structures in analog organizations. For one thing, they're much flatter. They share responsibility. There's much less top-down enforcement and micromanagement, and a lot more fluidity. People change roles. In one project, they're managers. In another project, they're experts. They change teams. And there is an attention to the culture in these companies that makes people want to go there. That's some interesting stuff. We can use that when we design our new Europe. What's more, I think we can use the tech industry's mistakes. Because in an effort to make up for the fact that the tech industry left women out for so long, the big companies have funded studies and trainings that show exactly what we need to do to curb bias and to create a culture where women can thrive. Let's use that too. Also, what we have now that we didn't have before is a whole academic field of study that deals with modern leadership practice. And this field of study teaches exactly the things we need to know. So how to mobilize instead of managing, how to inspire instead of enforcing, and how to plan for long-term sustainable solutions rather than short-term populist goals. This too is lying on the table. And finally, we have one more thing that I'd like to draw your attention to. Here in Europe, we have Iceland. Iceland is the #1 country for gender equality in the world. They had a woman president for 16 years in a row. And the women's movement there organizes a national strike every year because they don't want progress on gender equality to ever stop. So really, the only thing missing is an engine to get this change, this design process in motion. And I propose that this engine be the women's movement. We're already mobilized. Our people are out on the street, and we are very, very motivated because we know that in the European game of history, the stakes for women and for all of us are very high. And we also know that there isn't much time. The disrupted power structure of today gives us the perfect opportunity to reshape reality based on the values that we hold dear and with an effort to divide power equally between nations, between genders, and the technology companies. And now is the perfect time for women to reach into this disrupted landscape and reach for the equality and grab the equality that monarchies, dictatorships, communism, and in the end, not even democracy has ever given us. What we need to do, however, the challenge for all of us, for society as a whole, is to start looking at women and at feminists differently, to stop seeing them as these dangerous, hairy bitches that are better left alone, and see that we're actually friendly allies and be incredibly powerful agents of change in this time of disruption and chaos. And you know, the best thing about letting women lead the digital revolution, the best thing is that unlike other revolutions, women don't eat their children. We feed them. Thank you.